Alright, so I've got a question for you. Let's imagine a scenario where you're playing a split push champion in League of Legends. Maybe it's a top laner, maybe it's a mid laner, maybe it's a jungler who took teleport. Anyway, you're splitting bot lane since you had a good early game and the enemy team can't 1v1 you. Generally speaking, this can be a pretty good strategy. If the enemy team sends one person to deal with you bot, you solo kill them and keep on pushing. If they send more than one person to deal with you, the rest of your team has a 4 versus 3. But in this thought experiment, let's imagine that nothing works out. Your team doesn't group to do anything. Two people get caught out and die randomly, 2 others get caught out and die in the jungle after that, and you eventually get collapsed upon and killed, making it a full 5 kills for the enemy team, everyone on your team dying, and this starts an eventual throw of the game. So here's the question. Who's at fault here? This is what we're talking about today. Late game shot calling, whose responsibility it is and whose fault it is. This is a pretty interesting subject since, unlike every other role in League of Legends, shot calling doesn't have a designated guy who's responsible for it in solo queue, and this makes improving at this area of the game very, very difficult. Before we get into the meat of the video, I do want to say that this is a sponsored video sponsored by ProGuides.com. Go there for more tips, tricks, and ways to improve at League. Free 7-day trial at the link in the description down below. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about this. To answer the question from the intro, there isn't a single person at fault here. The entire team is at fault. The call to split push wasn't necessarily a bad call or a mistake in and of itself. I would say in this situation, it's probably the right call, but then again, I'm the one who made it. Teammates who refused to group despite being begged to are at fault. Players who roamed around on their own even though they knew no one was grouping were at fault. And the split pusher, yours truly, who gets himself collapsed upon and killed after all of this, is also at fault. When it comes to shot calling and late game strategy in League of Legends, varying degrees of responsibility are everywhere, which again is why it can be a very difficult skill to get better at. The call to split push in this example could be the 100% right decision and best possible play this team could make, but again, you could end up losing the game and throwing off of this call just from teammates not being on the same page and you playing the situation wrong. Side note, I suspect this is why, if you look at the YouTubers and the streamers who specialize in split pushing more so than anything else, they tend to be the most angry content creators in League and always flame their teammates. After all, it's an incredibly frustrating thing making a right decision and then getting punished for it just because your teammates didn't look at the chat. League of Legends is a kind of interesting game from a shot calling perspective too, because even if you're playing a game where you win your lane, everyone on your team also wins their lane in the early game, and things start off super well, even a team with a massive lead eventually hits this little dry spot in the mid game around 20 to 25 minutes where it becomes very difficult to know what to do next. You guys have all come up against this before, haven't you? You take your lane's outer turret after winning lane, everyone on your team also does well taking the other lane's outer turrets, you take the air drake or whatever goofy drake you ended up getting, and then now what? What are you supposed to do next? It's way too early to go for Baron. If you try and do it, the enemy team's going to come to defend it, ace you, and then you'll throw your lead. Or you could try and maybe push to take an inner turret, but if the enemy team shows up to group, then there'll be a good chance that they can win a fight under their own tower, and you'll throw your lead that way. There really isn't much that you can do at this point in the game other than hope the enemy makes a mistake and lets you sneak a tower or maybe get a pick on a poorly positioned player. The reason for this is simply how League of Legends is structured. Imagine a game at the 20 to 25 minute mark where every objective is still up and you want to group with your team and start taking towers. Well, if you haven't taken any objectives yet, the outer turrets are really easy. You have the advantage from being the attacking side. They're fragile, so you can kill them quickly, but even if the enemy team shows up and successfully defends one of them, this is the widest area of the map. You can go from one, rotate to another, and due to the fog of war, the enemy won't be able to keep up with your movements as you take their towers faster than they can defend them. But the more valuable the tower, the easier it is to defend. Because League of Legends map is funneled towards a base, the travel time between inner turrets is much shorter than the travel time between outer turrets, meaning that even a slow and poorly organized team should be able to respond to rotations and defend their inners. At this 20 to 25 minute mark of the game, if you can't push down an inner turret without threatening getting aced and throwing the match, then the only other important objectives are either going to be Dragon, if it's even up, and even then it might might be a water drake or something, or Baron, which is way too difficult to go for now. That means that your early lead that you got from killing your laners and out-CSing your opponent so much, well, it doesn't really mean all that much right now, and the enemy is going to be able to free farm and catch back up. The only other option here for a team that wants to group and do something would be to try and get a pick on an enemy player that maybe roams and face checks into a brush. But if you're in a rating where the enemy is going to solo face check brushes randomly, then you're probably in a rating where you have teammates that are also going to go and randomly get caught out as well. The answer for what you should be doing in this situation is typically going to come from the enemy team. There's pretty much two scenarios that you'll find yourself in. Either the enemy team is good at grouping to defend objectives, or they're going to stay split down lanes and not be that good at grouping. If they're not good at grouping to defend and instead just keep on splitting, then you should try and group and see if you can take a difficult objective, either an inner turret or Baron if you have a team that can do it early on. The difficulty of the objective matters much less if the enemy team isn't grouped as 5 to defend it. If you go and try and do Baron and only 3 people show up to try and stop you, you can easily turn on them and win a fight, or sometimes just finish off the Baron. Same deal with inner and inhibitor turrets. The other option is if the enemy is more coordinated and does group to defend things, meaning that you can't just try and sneak a tower or a Baron when they split. If this is the case, then this is when you should try split pushing and putting pressure on objectives. Especially if you have a solo laner who can threaten killing most enemies 1v1, this poses a massive problem when done correctly. The enemy team will have to send more than one person to deal with that split pusher and then be outnumbered on the rest of the map. If they only send one person, they're going to get killed 1v1 and lose tower after tower. In solo queue all the way up to mid diamond, most people don't really know how to deal with a good split push, especially if they're behind. Whether it's just sending a top laner with teleport or doing some sort of crazy 1-3-1 split, if the enemy's grouping to defend things and they can win fights 5 versus 5, you can respond by just not grouping. You can of course defend under tower if they try and take anything outnumbered. Instead, make the enemy team split, spread them out with a good split push and prevent them from executing any sort of team fight composition they might have. At the end of the day though, this is probably the most frustrating part of League of Legends, since you can make the 100% right call and still end up on the losing side of things. Typing or pinging to go for an objective doesn't guarantee that your teammates will listen, which also makes this a very easy part of the game for you to shift blame, another thing that's working against you. This is also the worst area of my game and where I need to improve the most, so I'm honestly not too sure how sound any of the advice I've given here is. Even if the facts of life are true, maybe my advice for how to deal with it isn't the best. I'm still stuck in low diamond because this is the part of League of Legends that I absolutely suck at, but nonetheless, I hope you guys still enjoyed this video and maybe found it a little bit informative or interesting. This is definitely one of the more interesting areas of League of Legends and an area worth talking about in my opinion. Anyway, if you're still listening to me now, thank you very much for watching this video. I'll see you all tomorrow or later today on my stream, but until then, thank you very much for watching. Good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.